So, we're on part three of the Great Depression. We're going to talk about the culture. And under normal circumstances, I would definitely be playing you music, all that good stuff, but this is not normal. So, Eleanor Roosevelt, the women of the Great Depression, she was part of FDR. It's his wife. So she was part of his brain trust, and he called his cabinet the brain trust. Some of the brightest and smartest people of the era in those positions, and he relied on them. One of them unofficially is his wife, Eleanor. She's going to speak for minorities' rights, women's rights. She's going to tour the country doing this stuff um, because he can't do it, because he needs those Southern Democrats to vote for the New Deal, the economic stimulus stuff. Frances Perkins. She is the first female secretary in U.S. history, and she's Secretary of Labor, and she writes the Social Security Amendment, or the Social Security Act. That is her brainchild. That is her her handwriting is all over that. And keep in mind, Social Security Act is still with us today and still benefits millions of Americans. So women in the workplace, working women face resentment from men because they were seen as taking men's jobs, and but they continued to work. Women were still, of course, paid less than men. Keep in mind, to this day, women are paid 21 to 23 cents less an hour for the exact same job a man does in 2020. So women will be paid less back then. Government programs definitely will give preference to men over women to try to get men back to work. So we're going to move on. So Native Americans and Roosevelt. Native Americans basically, FDR supports Native Americans. 1924, of course, they gained full citizenship. 1933, he appointed John Collier as Commission of Indian Affairs, and he believed Native Americans had rights just like any other Americans. 1934, the Indian Reorganization Act restored some reservation lands to tribal ownership, changed his lives in three ways. Economics, land would belong to tribes as a whole, and not broken up into individual farms. Cultural, the number of boarding schools on Native American lands the number of boarding schools for Native Americans were cut back, and children could attend day schools on the reservations. Political, Native American tribes were given permission to elect tribal councils to govern their own affairs, their own reservations. They were not appointed anymore. So, motion pictures. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs come out in 1937. That's the first full-length feature animated film. Walt Disney, of course. Gone with the Wind in 1939. Wizard of Oz in 1939 comes out. Keep in mind, we've talked about the Wizard of Oz and the political ramifications, and keep in mind, it's also one of the first colorized films. You ask, why didn't they do colorized films more? Too expensive. So, this young man on the right-hand side, that is Orson Welles, and he basically comes up, he had a radio show, and he comes up with this presentation called War of the Worlds. Some other popular radio shows would have been The Lone Ranger, soap operas like I think Guiding Light, I believe, was on radio. But Orson Welles with The Shadow and War of the Worlds, I give you a little preview of it, I believe, down here. You can look it up online. I know I try to play it for you in class. Basically, the presentation began 20 minutes before the most popular radio show of the day went off the air. So at the beginning of the radio show, they do let you know that it is a entertainment show. But we have millions of viewers or millions of listeners tune into this radio presentation about 20 minutes into it. And it basically gives the impression that we are under attack. And this comes out in 1939, so we have the war in Europe going on and stuff like that. So we have these preemptive news reports coming in on the radio a lot in 1939. So when he gives this presentation over the next couple of hours, it sounds like a regular radio program, but it's preempted by news reports. And in these news reports, it is we're being invaded by aliens from outer space. This is basically a theatrical rendition of War of the Worlds. It's a book that came out in the early 1900s, I believe 1905. But he adapts it for radio, and it freaks Americans out. They literally thought we were being attacked by aliens and that we had alien ships landing throughout the U.S. And it goes so far that there were Americans calling him to be put in prison for this. So it really freaked Americans out. But it makes him a huge, huge star, and eventually he'll go into Hollywood to star in films and produce a lot. So George Burns was a big entertainer in the 1930s as well, famous for being a comedian and a really good actor. He lives to the age of 99. And Bob Hope, he also gets his start in the 1930s. So some art and literature here. Many artists portrayed the reality of the Depression. You'll see here American Gothic here to the right-hand side. Some other pictures here, another picture down here at the bottom. Federal Artist Project, Grant Wood. He's the one that does American Gothic there to the right. The Grapes of Wrath is a classical novel written by John Steinbeck in 1939, and it focuses on a poor family of sharecroppers in Oklahoma. They're driven from their home because of the Dust Bowl, the drought, and they head to California in search of a better life. It's a really good read, and if you look at the bottom photograph, the young man in the middle there, if you ever heard of Jane Fonda, that's Henry Fonda. That is his first movie he does. Or his first major movie he does, and makes him a major star as well. Woody Guthrie, he's a folk singer during the Great Depression. His personal and musical styles were deeply influenced by his childhood in rural Oklahoma during the Depression years. He is the one who writes "This Land Is Your Land." He writes "Dust Bowl Refugee." He inspires most of the latter 20th century singer-songwriters in the U.S. Most notable would be Bob Dylan, would be Graham Stills. A lot of musicians are influenced by Woody Guthrie, and Bob Dylan said it was like meeting God. So, and Bob Dylan performed with him as well. So. And all of this stuff, the New Deal, all of these New Deal programs, everything, it doesn't end the Great Depression. So what's going to end the Great Depression? World War II. Now, I will note to you at the end here a couple of things about FDR. I've got some time. Number one, he wanted a third New Deal. He wanted his third New Deal in 1939. However, foreign affairs were taken over with the war in Europe and the oncoming war, all this stuff. But he wanted a third New Deal. And think about this for a minute. What do you think he wanted it to center around? Like the second New Deal centered around Social Security. What do you think he wanted the third New Deal to center around? You guessed it. Healthcare. He wanted to nationalize healthcare, and he wanted to make healthcare affordable for every American. That did not get done. So that's why when you hear people refer to President Obama as it took 70 years to get national healthcare program installed, it dates back to FDR. The other thing I want to point out to you about FDR is his personal life with his wife. He was not exactly the greatest moral man. He did have an affair numerous times with a young lady in the 1920s. In 1921, he was caught having an affair by his wife, Eleanor, and they never slept in the same bed again. Even when he was president, they didn't sleep in the same room. And he had affairs with other young ladies. You can look those up. And he did come back in 1940 and start dating his previous lady from the 1920s, Lucy, I think it was Mercer, I believe. And he had an affair with her from 1940 after her husband died until 1945. Actually, she was the one that was with him in Warm Springs, Georgia when he died, not Eleanor. So just to kind of point out, his personal life wasn't exactly what you would think of it, and it was very interesting. And if you want to read up on that, you can. But that's all I've got for you on that for today. As I said, America's entry into World War II gets us out of the Great Depression.